everyone. Welcome to a bit of a different Friday Fireside Chat. I'm Rita McGrath, and I'm here with Ron Boer. We're partially representing our company Valize, and partially we're here at Columbia Business School, where it is a beautiful day here in New York City on the 10th floor of the Kravis building. So that's where you physically find us at the moment. But what we're going to be doing is talking about what's new at Valize, which is a company that was founded basically to bring the concepts of innovation and transformation that both of us have been working on in different capacities over the years to life. So join in the conversation. Please contribute to the chat, ask questions, and Jacora, who's with us as well, will be monitoring to see if there's any questions that deserve our attention. So thank you for joining and spending some time with us as we talk about what happened with Valize. So, we're in the fourth quarter now, right? Getting to the end of 2023, and it's been such an interesting year. So much happened in 2022, and then 2023 just kind of everybody was sort of sitting on their hands, just kind of frozen. What we're now seeing, though, is some of the more forward-looking organizations are really mobilizing to move ahead. And you've been crazy coaching like the last couple of months, and I thought it would be just fun to sort of, what are you hearing? What are people saying? What's on their minds these days?
It's really fascinating. It's been a really interesting year, and coming into the year, like a lot of industries, our industry was on fire. I mean, we frequently had conversations about how we're gonna deal with all these customers knocking down our door, and all of a sudden people were like, "Well, we don't really know what's going on." And that's the theme around a lot of the coaching and advisory work that I've been doing throughout the summer and into the fall, is this uncertainty. Like, I don't know where the world's going. So let's talk about just decarbonization, right? So it seems like everybody that I'm dealing with on the advisory side, and we're dealing with on Valize, is in some way trying to figure that out. So, one of our clients is in the electrical distribution business. So you think, well, how great is that? I mean, everybody's got to use electricity. You're going to get to sell a lot more product. Well, you got to build a lot more power lines. You've got to have distribution systems. You've got to go raise capital for that. And the cost of capital is, more than doubled in the last 12 to 18 months. So it's a massive project to figure out how you're going to raise all this capital. Then you have all the efficiency issues around that. We have another client that's in the construction materials business, and they have the same issues around capital. Now the construction business has been on fire, went through this crazy slowdown this spring, and at least the commercial side of it's coming back rather nicely, but they have the same cost issues around how prices have moved, how cost of capital moves for their business and their customers. Other customers in the commercial real estate business is just, some of these projects have just completely stopped. Now the other side of that coin is, where am I going to go? Where's the world going? And this whole thing about artificial intelligence, and let's not get into like what it really means, but over the long term, how technology impacts your business is going to be a really big deal. And one of our associates, Chandler, is one of the leading thinkers in this space, and we're thinking a lot about this, how it works in the real world. But a lot about uncertainty, a lot about where to invest, how do I invest. And then the final one, which is the most important, is like the war for talent. How people think about their job, their career is radically changed, because virtually everyone to some degree is working from home, working remotely. Talent is much more fungible, if you will, from the talent's perspective. I can work here or I can work there because I'm working from my living room, or I have a lot of options. So how leaders manage their talent and how they invest their talent is always a big topic.
So one of the really interesting things to me about what we're doing at Belize, and I should probably maybe explain the different ways we're trying to help companies have a bigger impact. So There's clearly the advisory work where we'll come into a company, help them set up their governance process, help them set up an innovation funding mechanism, figure out what kinds of project you should be doing, do a portfolio review, kind of just get your house in order in terms of being able to consistently build innovation as a proficiency. And I think we're maybe at the end of the latest cycle of innovation theater. Everybody was building accelerators and studios, and they hire some guy who was going nowhere at Apple or Google or Amazon, and then all of a sudden that person becomes their innovation person, and we have boot camps and thousands of post-it notes die a horrible death while we all ideate, and all that stuff never really builds up to anything, and then those efforts disappear. And that's kind of where we are right now. Like in 2023, I saw a lot of those things just kind of quietly, or sometimes not so quietly, go away. And now I think what's happening is companies are starting to get serious about, the world is changing in a way that's very fundamental, and we are not fit for purpose for that. I mean, I had a conversation a week or two ago with someone in the publishing business, and if you haven't figured out that big changes are coming for you in the publishing business, like where are you? Are you under a rock?
Where have you been? Where have you been, and what have you been doing?
So we're kind of getting there. So a couple of things that we're trying to do. The first one is we're building this software tool, as we call it, Spark Hub. And what Spark Hub does is it takes that process from when you've got an idea to the time that it actually gets handed over to a business unit, and helps you make that really transparent and really, really clear. And we've been working on it a while, but I'm really pleased that now I think we're right on the brink of being able to bring it up to scale. And so we've got 3 flavors of it, right? One is the corporate version, where we would come in and use that probably in connection with the advisory services, or maybe not. But we've also got versions that are more suitable for smaller companies or consultants. And we've got a version for the classroom. And so what I think it does is it allows you to track your projects, make them really practical. And you've got a company that's been working with it, so maybe talk about some of their experiences.
Yeah. So one of the things that's fascinating, first of all, Spark Hub is built all around the portfolio work that Rita's done for a very long time, and discovery-driven planning. So we frequently, clients will come to us and say, well, how do we innovate? And it's I'm always reminded of that great movie Strange Brew, where the director's standing off to the side yelling, act. Like somebody landed and said, innovate. And innovation is like anything else. You have to work at it, you gotta have a plan. And so Spark Hub, what it allows you to do is take your projects, really set them up in a way that they're trackable, transparent, and develop a clear discovery-driven growth process. And the startup is always really interesting. So we've got a client that's been working with the software for over a year now, and they've arranged it in a way which I think is probably going to be best in class, which is they have a director of innovation, kind of a project manager who owns the software, and then de facto owns the communication back and forth with the teams, and is really driving the what's good look like in this project, what would have to be true, therefore what are the steps that we would have to go through, the checkpoints that we'd have to go through. And it's in the beginning, he was saying, well, I can't get a meeting. It's like me trying to get a prom date. Like it was just not happening, right? So it's like, I can't get a meeting, nobody will talk to me. And after about 12 months of kind of working the process and really working with each one of these teams, he's now become a resource. Now people are calling him saying, I'm starting a new project. How do I set it up? How do I get moving? And most recently, in just the last 30 days or so, they used the output from the software in a CEO presentation extremely well. The software tracks the projects over time, so you can back up in time and go, hey, this is what something looked like a year ago, 9 months ago, yesterday, and really see how projects move from kind of like stepping stones into platforms and eventually become kind of a core project. So it's really proven to be a fantastic tool for them.
Well, and I think what it does is, I mean, when I ask companies, like what's the state of the art in keeping track of your innovation activity, right? It's still spreadsheets and PowerPoints, and you want to know the updated status of your whole portfolio. Some intern is like 24/7 running around from people's desks or phones or whatever, trying to figure out
what's the chief of staff panic.
Exactly. And so what this does is it allows you to keep track of things right in the system so that you can really learn from it. And so Jacora, maybe if you put the link to the Spark Hub demo in the chat, people can know where to go to take a look at it. So there's an online demo that you can take right on the Valize website, and you can sort of watch how the system works and go through it. And we're very happy to answer questions, fill in any issues that you've got. We're hoping within a pretty short period of time to have a version you can just buy online if you want to, and at a pretty affordable subscription price. So we're hoping that'll have more of an impact in the world. The second thing that we've been developing, and which you just launched a week or two ago, are our learning guides. And you can think of these things like guides to the innovation transformation process that are easy to digest. They're very quick. They're in short little bites, and they're meant to be consumed as close to your need for them as possible. And so we're releasing one guide a week, and you can think of them kind of like living versions of the Harvard Business Review or something like that, where there's a lesson, there's an application, there's an assessment so you can see how well you're doing. There are often downloadable tools and templates that you can use. But I think the big breakthrough there is you can do it as you need to in real time. It's not like a course that you have to take. It's more of a guide to your learning. And then we also offer them as collections, so that you can think of collections like a bunch of 6 guides that are all bundled together because they relate to a common theme. And we're very excited about those because what we keep hearing from companies is, yeah, it'd be great to train people, right? And that's wonderful, but I don't just need 5 or 6 people trained. I need 600. I need 6,000 to know how to do customer interviews, for example, or how to test a prototype, or how to think about budgeting for a new venture. And with these guides, you can now do that at scale.
And I think they're a great augmentation to the software as well, right? So if someone's using the software, it's like, to your point, how do I do a customer interview? And the other thing that's important about the learning guides and a lot of the stuff that you're doing and Valize is doing in development is budgets have changed a lot. The days of everybody kind of flying to Las Vegas and having a class for 3 days, those days are over. But people still want to learn, and the hunger for learning is really high. And you see that with these starts and stops with certain online learning programs that, some of them work, a lot of them don't work. And, people and corporations and heads of HR trying to figure out how do I, A, develop my talent, and B, have my talent feel valued.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, like how do we get to a point where they're like, oh, you're paying for this course. It's not a lot of money, but I'm learning something, and you've now sent a recognition of value signal to me.
Yeah, I love that about them. And so there's going to be dozens of them that come on, and they're all around themes that are reflected in the typical checkpoints you might go through in a discovery-driven model. So let me just spend a minute on that for those that might not be familiar with this concept. So discovery-driven growth, had its seeds in this study that I used to do of corporate flops. These are the big ones, right? This was like Euro Disney, which nearly took the whole company down in the early 90s, or FedEx, which had this great system called Zap Mail, where you would take a piece of paper and you would bring it to a FedEx office, and it would zap the mail to another FedEx office. And
a fax machine.
So, yeah, that got to be kind of the problem. And then more recently,
brilliant idea.
It was a brilliant idea, right? And then more recently than that, we had Quibi, right? Short 10-minute movies made by this star-studded group of Hollywood people. And they spent $2 billion before they finally figured out actually people don't want to watch 10-minute movies.
We could have told them that for $1 million.
We could have saved them a fortune telling them that. Or Anheuser-Busch and Keurig, that this sort of love child that they created called the DrinkWorks system, which is a cocktail machine with a push button, which actually is a a good idea. And there's an entrepreneur doing a thing called the Bartesian system, which works really great. But nobody sat down and did the math and said, well, hang on, for two combined companies that are earning $23 billion in revenue a year, how big does this thing have to be to make it worthwhile? And we did an analysis that found that every man, woman, and child, like of drinking age in the United States, would have to drink 4 of these things a day. We would be a staggering nation to make their profit numbers work. And so, and you had one about, what was the TV thing? They were going to send TVs.
Oh my God, this thing is,
talk about this. That was great.
It's just amazing. So someone has come up with this brilliant idea where they will give you a television for free, but underneath the television, you have like 4 little screens that show you ads as you're watching television, right? And but wait, it gets better. There's a camera there to kind of watch you watch the ads so that they can see what you're reacting. Because of course you need to get feedback. Like, so if you don't actually watch an ad or interface with it, like, you know, the ads will change. So they're watching you watch the ad. So their business model is that they have to give away this television. And we did a quick reverse income statement on this. And it is virtually impossible to make any profit whatsoever off this over the years. When you think about like what are people paying per 1,000 views for online digital ads, and you say, okay, well let's pretend they're going to get that completely, which they're not, because you're showing 4 ads simultaneously, and then all the maintenance and it's just impossible.
Well, and how do you?
We're just waiting for the official flop.
Stay tuned. Watch this space.
They haven't declared a flop yet.
But so this whole thing keeps happening and happening and happening, and so this got me certainly, and then later on thinking about, well, why does this keep happening? Like, these are not dumb companies. Disney's a super well-run company. FedEx changed the world. Some of these others, I mean, certainly the people behind Quibi. I mean, Meg. Whitman is not a dumb person. So why does this keep happening? And what we came to realize is that all of these things had a really high amount of uncertainty to them. In other words, the ratio that you have to make of assumptions that you have to make relative to knowledge is really, really substantial. And yet they were being planned with the same methodology and the same tools and the same approach that you would use if you were planning, say, a line extension or just an ordinary expansion into a new geography of a well-established product. And so this really was the birth of discovery-driven growth, which is the methodology that we work with, both in our that the software is designed around, that the learning guides are designed around, and which our advisory is now designed around, which is to really help you understand how you plan when you really don't have facts, when what you got is assumptions. And the first year or two of our advisory work has been kind of hilarious, because you'll find a company well on their way to having one of these ginormous corporate flops, and heading them off at the pass, I think, is really important. And so I can say with some confidence we've saved several clients from some big disasters. So talk about the one where you were helping them with the board plan. So here's the scenario, right? So this client, which is a big materials supplier to pharmaceutical businesses, among other kinds of countries, but very large, very multinational materials supplier. And they had this one project that had been done the right way, right? They had rented facilities, they had borrowed some stuff, they'd done 3 years worth of sort of scientific development and proof of concept, and they're now just on the brink of being ready to join the mothership, to sort of get their own facility, to get their own board, to begin the scaling up process. And so we were brought into this thing with maybe you can help these guys think about what their business should be. And then I think, Ron, you took it pretty much over from there.
Yeah, I mean, so this was a great concept on a new product. I won't go into what the product is, but the product is actually in the market now. And the idea was it's a company that's good at chemistry and pharmaceuticals and production, and they said, well, we think this is an emerging market, and we need help kind of thinking through it. So we launched a project in around, I guess it was around January or early February, with the idea that they needed to make a presentation to the board of directors around the middle of April.
Right? It was April. Yeah, I remember.
And so we're herding the cats and trying to get people aligned, and over weeks and weeks and weeks, meeting after meeting doesn't happen, data doesn't come, marketing plans aren't produced. And finally we got to, about the middle of March, and I threw up this huge red flag, and I said, listen, you guys are going to the board of directors in like 4 weeks with no plan. Like you don't.
Well, and so just to give you a context of what we were asking for, right, was this team had just outgrown the sort of piloting, prototyping stage of their existence, and they were either going to be able to move forward and bring this thing up to scale, what we call the acceleration process. So beginning to mature their processes, bringing in, a bigger team, bringing in top talent, getting commercial production facilities, really getting their ecosystem lined up. I mean, they were on the brink of doing that. So either the business was going to disappear, or it was going to be able to take this next step, but they needed to get the mothership on board.
Yeah, and they had everything they needed. They had all the data, they had all the capabilities, they had all the tests happening, but they, were unable to pull this thing together. So finally, over the last 2 weeks before the board meeting, I spent about, 36 hours a day working with them, building the board deck, actually, kind of back testing all of their assumptions and helping them make the presentation. And ultimately, they received $500 million in funding in that board meeting.
Wow.
And
I didn't know it was that big.
Yeah, it was $500 million.
Wow.
And it's on the front page of their website.
Oh, I love
today.
This part. So
this is my favorite part. Go ahead.
So in their annual report, this thing is now like the flagship offering of their R&D department. It's the one that they're claiming credit for with all their investors and everybody else. And that project nearly died. And it wasn't that anybody meant badly. So, and here's the big point about what we're doing at Valize with respect to sort of helping you build capability. Like, we're not going to do the work for you, but what we'll do is help you avoid the worst mistakes, sort of suggest what's next, right? Because the guy that was running this business, the particular one Ron was talking about, brilliant scientist, right? Brilliant kind of entrepreneurial scientific type. He doesn't know anything about managing mothership. He doesn't know anything about how you talk to the CFO. I mean, it just wasn't in his wheelhouse. And it wasn't that he was a bad person or that he wasn't very good at what he was doing, which was building this business. It was that he just didn't have that depth of experience. And someone like Ron, and I haven't told you about Ron's background, but, someone like Ron has been a public company CEO, has, run name brand companies, has brought me in a couple of times because he really liked the methodology. So he's seen it from both sides, as the person bringing in someone to help with the thought process, as well as the person now doing the thought process. But there's just a skill gap very often between the people in the ventures and the people that are part of the mothership that's going to have to be included if the venture is going to be a success.
And it's not a small point. The capability point is not a small point, because what happens in a lot of large corporations is you buy the answer and you buy the arms and legs to build out the answer. And the most obvious examples of that are things in the process space, where Accenture, for example, the kings of IT and process. If you really have a process problem, you call them, they say, this is what the solution is, and here's 400 people that are going to build it for the next year, and it'll be done.
And they're, by the way, they're terrific at that. I mean, we are all for that.
They're extraordinary at that. But if you want to build a new capability, if you want to truly build an innovation capability or transformation capability, you can't hire somebody to do that for you. You have to do it. So, what we really focus on is building that capability, working with the leaders. And in spite of the fact that I've worked, long hours on this presentation, ultimately what we were doing is teaching them the discovery-driven growth process, deconstructing the work they're doing and then reconstructing it in a way that, the board could see the possibilities. And, we didn't run the work. We never did a single bit of the work. But what we did is help them look at what they were doing and think differently about how they're going to present it, de-risk it, and ultimately build the plan. And that's a capability that they now have. And unfortunately, these capabilities, they don't actually spread like weeds, right? So the same very large company in a different division immediately after that hired us for another project. Do you remember that project? And so because of the experience with the last project, we were extremely clear about there's things that really, really have to happen before this is going to happen. And this was you remember this one? This was a ground up project. And it was like, you're going to be really early on. We're going to get to define, kind of what good looks like, build out the team. You can, teach the team.
So what we were told when we were brought into this was, all it is a PowerPoint slide. That's as far as it's gone.
Right.
And when we start to unpack it, what we find is no. The science and technology function is sort of funding this thing. Then we've got somebody from sort of headquarters who's involved vaguely in the oversight, and then we've got a region that's involved in actually promoting this venture.
Well, and the key here was, we've got a very distinct process, which starts with, you really need to define what success looks like. What does good look like? So 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, when you're done, what does that look like? And I was told, oh, that's a 30-minute meeting. We don't have a problem with that.
No problem. Right?
No issue. So we kick off the program in May. We find out all this stuff. So it starts with brand new idea. It's going to be ground up. We're going to use the DDG process. We're going to do everything you want to do. And by the way, on a memo that looked a lot like this, we were very, very detailed on, these are all the things that have to happen. And the first thing was defining what good looks like. By the end of July, we had stopped the project because they couldn't define what good looked like. And this is, a huge global multi-billion-dollar company. And in this particular case, this is, Rita talks about managing the mothership. This became a mothership issue, right? So you had a group that had the budget. You had a group in corporate that had some kind of governance responsibility. And then you had a regional group that ultimately had to deliver the goods. Well, good idea comes from the R&D group. The governance individuals like, oh, this is a neat idea. We'll put some resources behind it. The group in the region was like, oh, here we have a good idea. Let's sprint. They literally had hired software developers, done licensing deals, the whole 9 yards before they even knew what the finish line looked like. Mm-hmm. Now, this is not uncommon in a sales organization, but kind of surprising, totally new category, totally new marketplace to have this kind of lack of focus on what's the finish line. Absolutely. So Rita, we do have some questions.
Oh, great. Here. Okay. Yeah.
So Frank must use AI to write his questions. So Frank is asking, thanks for the interesting fireside. Thank you very much, Frank. You say you're seeing quite a bit of changes and innovation work going on in numerous areas. In this regard, I came to think of Amy Edmondson. You're a big fan of Amy. New book, Right Kind of Wrong. On page 91, she wrote, I noticed that punishing people for making mistakes increases the likelihood of failure. That's shocking because people will not admit mistakes. A question, what are, as you experience in your work, some of the effective ways we can go about mistakes when we do innovation work? Thanks in advance. So this is the essence of discovery-driven growth and transparency. So I'll speak from my corporate experience, and then Rita will give you the smart answer. But in the corporate world, and Rita has this great class here at Columbia.
Look how unbranded we are.
Leading strategic growth and change. And she asked me to come in and talk to the students. And one of the things I asked the students, and these students are generally young executives, when we start a class, I'll say, raise your hand if you're a loser. Mm-hmm. You know what? Nobody raises their hand. And the way you win in the corporate environment is you don't lose, you don't admit mistakes, because that's taboo. And I was telling Rita today, I'm reading Isaacson's book on Musk, mm-hmm. and one of the things they talk about in SpaceX is they want to go really fast because they literally want the engine to blow up and figure out why did it blow up so they can fix that. Mm-hmm. And that's what discovery-driven growth is about. I'll let Rita talk about it, but culturally, in almost any corporation, and the larger the corporation, the bigger the issue, failure is not an option. The worst thing that ever happened to business in the last 20 years is people playing clips of Apollo 13 where, I've been in those meetings. Failure is not an option. Oh boy, failure is an option. It happens all the time. And so anyhow, so Frank, thanks for the question. That's the political and leadership angle. And Rita can tell you why discovery-driven growth is a big part of the answer here.
Well, so Amy in her book specifically talks about 3 different kinds of failure. So there's intelligent failure, which is the kind of failure that we're talking about with discovery-driven growth. And I'll expand on that in just a minute. Then there's basic failures, which is somebody didn't follow the procedure, somebody screwed up, somebody, cut a corner, somebody was careless, somebody did the wrong thing. Those kinds of failures you don't want to encourage, because you're not learning anything from them. And they're just basically evidence that somebody really didn't do what they were supposed to do. And then there are what she calls complex systems failures. So think about the air traffic control system, for example, or, the system that runs a nuclear submarine. And in the different kinds of systems, failure means something different. So basic failures we don't want. And what you want to do there is training and practice and procedures to prevent those things from happening. Those are the predictable ones that, somebody just messed up. Complex systems failures means everybody in the operation has to be super attuned to what could go wrong. And with a complex system, you absolutely have to report any deviation, anything that happened. So if you think about why air travel is so safe in the United States, right? And we haven't had a big crash in many, many years now. And you think about that's pretty amazing, right? Yeah, I know. But why is that happening? It's because not only are people permitted to talk about failing, they're required. So if somebody makes a mistake, if something goes wrong, if a controller sends a plane down an active runway when they shouldn't have, all of that stuff gets recorded. And then there are regular meetings of all the parties involved to say, what would we have to do to prevent that from happening? So that's a complex system. Now let's turn to the intelligent failures. So an intelligent failure has very specific properties. And the term comes from Sim Sitkin of Duke, who wrote this great sort of chapter on this notion of intelligent failures. So they're genuinely unknown. So you can't just say, oh, well, that was, I failed, when you could have known the outcome and you just didn't do your homework. That's a basic failure. We don't want those. So it's genuinely unknown. Typically the experiment or the test that you're doing is small. You can do it quickly. You have a clearly specified hypothesis, so you can tell whether something happened or not. And everybody agrees. Without doing the experiment or without encouraging the risk of failure, we're just not going to be able to learn what we need to learn, kind of blow up a rocket. So I'll give you a very trivial example from our experience, which is we were working with a bank founded by a recovering American Express executive named Colin Walsh, who's a brilliant guy. And his mission in life is to help income secure but cash flow challenged young people build up some wealth so that they're not one car payment or accident or wedding away from having to take out money on really expensive credit cards. That's his mission. And so the whole bank is branchless, right? It's all intermediated by a chatbot named Val. And this was way before AI became so popular. They were using AI in this application, remember? And so really early on in the design process came the question, well, what kind of personality should Val have? And the design team broke into two warring camps, right? One camp was like, oh, Val should be, hey, dude, tough weekend, huh? Don't worry, got your back. Emoji, very casual, right? And the other group was like, no, this is a bank, for God's sake. We need to be respectful and mature. And Mr. Robertson. Now here we have, and this, Frank, I think is one of the critical things. We have two valid hypotheses, right? It could have been either one. And if you think about it, Venmo is very chatty, right? So there's a financial services application that has that kind of interface versus, your typical banking application, which is much more formal. So how do you test that, right? Well, what you do is you run an experiment and you name it that and you call it that. So what did we do? We got two interns. We stuck them metaphorically in a couple of closets. We had design developers wireframe some apps up for us. We lured members of our target market into the conference room with promises of free pizza. We gave them the use case and we let them play with the thing. And the interns behaved as though the programs had been built when they hadn't. It was a human sort of test. And it turns out they hated the Hey Dude guy. Like, Hey Dude was fine for Venmo and it's good for, goofy applications with my buds, but I'm not trusting my financial security to that, right? I want to be treated with respect. Now, the reason I tell this story is looked at in the wrong way. The Hey Dude people were wrong. They failed. They were not correct. Here's the point. In genuine uncertainty, when you don't have the answer, the only way you're going to get to an answer is by trying something and see what works, right?
Yeah, blow the engine up.
Blow the engine up, right?
Yeah, and in the best organizations in the world have these processes. So think about every landing on an aircraft carrier. There is a review of that landing, right. Whether it was perfect or not. Pilots all sit down. Every landing is looked at. What went right? What went wrong? And it's graded. And these are obviously competitive people and very talented people. And you would think they'd be like, well, I landed the plane. What else do you want? The old adage, just like any landing you walk away from. That's just not true. No. Not any landing you walk away from is a good landing. You have to walk away from a landing that was done perfectly. And that's always the goal. And back to aviation, things like checklists, where did checklists come from? Right. Like you forgot to do the flaps and you crashed the plane. Well, if you have a checklist, you don't do that. Discovery-driven growth is your checklist. Your checkpoints are your checklist. And it's like, before I spend the next $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, did this actually work? Did the engine blow up? Okay, it blew up. Cool. Why did it blow up? Well, the ceramics in the cone failed. Oh, well, maybe we should fix that before we do another one. Exactly. As my mom would say, you should do that.
Talk about your insurance guy that wanted to spend, what did you want to spend, $1 million on building a prototype?
Oh my God. Yeah. So one of the, ventures that I'm personally working with is it's in the financial services / insurances kind of space. And I'm having this conversation. I've been having this conversation, and we've been working on this product. And by the way, it'll probably launch early next year. Nice. Very cool product. Very, very customer centric, provides a great end user service. And he said to me, he's like, I want to build a beta site. And he goes, and I think, we're, our first round, our seed round, we should, raise about $1 million, because $1 million sounds good, right? Sure. It's real money. And he goes, for our website, he goes, I think for about 150,000, we can put up a test site. And I said, well, why don't you see what you can do for 1,000? And he was just floored. It's like, what do you mean? What can you do for 1,000? I said, well, I could go onto Squarespace today, and for $12, I could put up a Squarespace site, and we could test how people
see whether anybody responds.
See if anybody responds to it. And the long story short, the site that is going to actually deliver the product has been in development now for about 6 or 7 months, and we have not spent $50,000 yet. So he's figured out step by step, what do you really need to do? Who can do this? Can this be done in India at $12 an hour instead of San Antonio at $120 an hour? What do you want to do in San Diego? You actually want to do cybersecurity in the US. You maybe want to have those people do that. But the basic coding you can do someplace else. So just challenging yourself to think differently. And I was telling, we'll talk, Elon Musk is on my head because I'm reading Isaacson's book, but I was telling Rita a story today, and I won't go into it too much because you guys will all read the book, about a part that was $250,000 that they ended up building for 1/100th of that price. Less.
Well, it was a nozzle, right? And they found a nozzle in a car dealership or something,
a car wash or something like that. And they modified it, and it worked. And they're not sending humans in these. They just want to see if the engine's going to work, right? And then once you figure out how it's going to work, okay, now we'll make it 100% reliable, right? That's the whole point. So the point in a lot of those cases was, we want to see where failure happens, which I think is a really interesting way to think about it. So if you think about what SpaceX was doing in the early days, is figuring out where failure happens. They knew it wasn't going all the way up. They knew eventually the thing was going to blow up, but where was it going to blow up and what was going to cause it? They didn't actually know. And what they were trying to do is create a product that was, 10 times more efficient in terms of cost than the current product, which was, call it a Saturn V rocket, right? Right. And the results have been nothing short of spectacular.
It's been amazing.
But if you think about it, the other thing I was thinking about, and it's not covered in the book, but at least so far, is think about all the bad press. Think about how many times have you seen a SpaceX rocket blow up, right? And then the video of the team just sitting there and going, "Okay, that was pretty cool." And then the interview is like, "Yeah, it was a successful launch," and people going, "What do you mean it was successful?
It blew up."
It blew up, yeah, but it blew up further up than we thought it would. It didn't blow up as soon. It should have blown up in the pad, and it didn't. It got up in the air. So more of that in corporations and frankly in your personal life is definitely good for you, right? Learning how to fail fast, that old expression, but that's what discovery-driven growth is. Failing smart, understanding why you did it, and by the way, not every test fails, but most of them don't end exactly the way you think they're going to end.
Right. So are there any other questions we should
look at? Francis had a question about ChatGPT. And he goes, so what are some examples of ways that people who work for different companies you interact with use Gen AI? And how does Gen AI help people learn and innovate? So I'll start a little bit. I think that we're really in the early days of AI, or more accurately, machine learning. And the most interesting thing that I see out of it is I think it's kind of like the new Google search, right? So when I have a question, I might use Gen AI. We're seeing it in businesses that I'm involved in. We're seeing it a lot in copy. We're seeing it a lot in blogging and things of that nature. I had one, and you can probably find it on my LinkedIn feed. I had my first ever Gen AI response to a post.
That was hilarious.
And I was like, and I showed it to Rita the other day. I was like, I get this response to a post, and it was like this really long, beautifully written response. I'm reading it. And it's like, that's just not human. That's like not a human response. I'm like, oh, that was ChatGPT. Right. Somebody used ChatGPT to respond to my post. But anyways, we're definitely seeing it a lot in the content space. We're not in the coding space, but I am hearing a lot about the use in coding. I have used it actually with my son, who's in a very technical space, was asked to do a presentation, and I asked ChatGPT to write the presentation for him. And I sent it to him, and he said, "This is actually pretty amazing." And it was in space around. He's in horticulture, so growing. So I don't think we're not even seeing the tip of the iceberg with Gen AI, generative AI, and machine learning. And to me, it's one of the things that, as we're talking to companies, it is one of the great unknowns. It is a space where people are investing a lot of human talent to try to figure out what to do with it. And Rita, I'll let you.
Yeah, well, so I was just yesterday, in fact, I was with a group of leaders at a big conference called DFarm, which is in the area of pharmaceuticals that does the clinical trials, and was talking to someone he focuses on leukemia and cancers of the blood. And he said he's been running in parallel. He's been running a part of a clinical trial. So the way it works is you get data, right? And then the data get analyzed, and then there's a report that gets written. And what he did in parallel was he had ChatGPT analyze the data and write the report. Now, remember, these are very structured things. So this is not like a human creativity thing. It's here's what the data mean. And if you see these following patterns, this is what goes into the clinical report. And he said the clinical report that the robots wrote were actually better, more accurate, and more thorough than the clinical report that the human beings wrote. And it makes perfect sense, right? If what you want is a machine that doesn't get tired and doesn't get bored and doesn't need to go to the bathroom, and it's going to pay attention to every single pixel on the page, right? And they're going to incorporate all that information in a very standardized report. Of course, a machine's going to do better than that, than a distracted human being would. And so that's an example to me of within minutes you could put those human beings onto working on something else. There's another great story that he was talking about where there's a technology developed in Israel where you can actually get data about what's going on with your blood by shining this like really bright light on your forehead. And what that's enabled is routine cases where, for example, if you want to take out, say, a term life insurance policy, right? And routinely what you'd have to do is go to a doctor's office and they would assess your vital signs. And if you pass the test, then they would give you the insurance. Now, what is happening in Europe, because this is an Israeli company that started to sell in Europe, what's happening is these insurance agents say, download this app, shine this light against your face. Depending on the results, will determine how much insurance you can get. So they've completely eliminated that routine trip to the doctor's office to get this assessment. So that's an example of where some of these technologies are starting to come together to change the way work is done. Now, you still have to get the assessment. They still have to evaluate the risk, but now we're taking a piece out of that system. So
and real innovation would be hiring somebody who has the right forehead, right? You just aim this at their forehead. One quick note on generative AI and in kind of the human condition. So not to denigrate our great business school that you're at here, but the things that you don't learn at business school are the things that generative AI can't do. It's the human things around leadership, around how organizations really function, around risk taking, and the human condition around risk taking. There are many, many, many things that machines will do better than humans do. I mean, today, machines can run faster, fly higher, and lift more than human beings, but we don't worry about, cars, planes, and cranes taking away human jobs. They've created other jobs. Right. And the same thing will happen with AI. And, when you think about, whether it's basic coding versus network engineering, you're not going to have an AI be the lead network engineer for, a great network company. But will they be able to do coding? Absolutely. So we will evolve and the use of the tool will evolve.
So we've got a few more minutes. I thought I'd just summarize some of what we're working on at Valize, and then maybe talk a little bit about how people could work with us if they need to do that. So what we've got built right now is we have the Spark Hub software, which exists and it works, and we've got real live users on it, which is a super exciting moment for us. We have the learning guides, which are, again, they're available. They're right on the Valize website, and you can, I think we've got 2 that are up and ready for sale. We're going to have the first 6, and then we'll form a collection. So if you wanted to have a whole curriculum, you could do that. We're also doing, kind of working with companies. And somebody asked us the other day, well, where would you start, right? And typically where we would start would be some kind of assessment of what's the state of play in the organization. So how mature is your innovation governance process, for example? How do you fund innovation? How do you look at your portfolio of activities? And usually that sort of, it's like picking up a rock, right? And there's all these things that are going on that nobody's been paying attention to in the firm. I literally was talking to a company the other day that said they have no dedicated people working on their next opportunities. Nobody. Everybody's like part-time, 10% maybe on innovation. And I can promise you right now, yes, you'll get cool things happening and somebody will come up with some ideas, but you're not going to get a needle moving, build my company fit for purpose for the future set of innovations with a bunch of part-time people, kind of dedicating a little bit of time to it, because the day job is always going to take priority. And I'm not saying it's not because they're not good people. It's because they've got other things that are distracting them. So to put this all in context, one of the things I've been writing about for a long time is as competitive advantages get shorter, we're not training people in what they need to know. So the beginning part of the process, which I call innovation, but you can also think of it as M&A, transformational work, merger. There's lots of different ways you can build a new advantage, right? So you've got some kind of innovation process. Then you've got your exploitation process, and we do that very well here at business schools and other places. And that's rinse and repeat. Do tomorrow what you did yesterday, do the day after that what you did tomorrow a little bit better. And then when the advantage is exhausted, right? Your BlackBerry phones, your Nokia flip phones, go back in the day, you're a Xerox plain paper copier, whatever the thing is that was carrying you. And this, by the way, happens frequently, right? If you go to the whole direct to consumer bunch of companies that were making so much noise in the 2010s, it comes under pressure. And then your job is transformation, which is really what Ron works on, which is now I've got to take the center of gravity of my firm and move it to some other way of being. So if you look at, say, Adobe, which recognized that with the advent of cloud-based services and with the advent of subscription software as subscription models, selling shrink-wrapped software on CDs in a box was not going to be their future. They had to actually move the whole center of the gravity to a new way of being. So when you work with us, what we'll give you is honesty about where things are. That is not always the most popular position to take, but we'll give you an assessment and say, look, if you wanted to move your organization forward, here are some very concrete and specific things that you can do. And then we support that with the learning guides and the software.
Yeah. And sometimes it starts with, a lot of times it starts with a problem. We frequently ask our clients, give us a problem statement. I mean, sit down and kind of write out what your problem is. And don't use ChatGPT, but give us a statement. Very clearly, what do you want to achieve? And generally, there's a growth component to this. Frequently, there's also a cost component. I'll be honest, we love to work on growth and don't like to work on cost, but they do come together. Sometimes growing is about reallocating costs and cutting costs in area A to invest in area B quite frequently. So, I mean, the other thing that I think is very, very clear in a lot of the work we're doing is ultimately it comes down to how do we have help humans be better leaders, be better in their space, whether it's the learning guide, whether it's the software tools, whether it's advisory. At the end of the day, we want to leave wherever we were better than it was when we got there.
Absolutely.
And that's what the fun part of the job is.
Yeah. And I mean, we can't talk about it publicly, but Ron's had a very significant success with sort of steering people involved either directly or tangentially in the innovation process to a better place, and these are things you can't talk about publicly, but it's very rewarding when it does happen. Two other things that we're working on. So for those of you that are tuned in and might be interested, we're going to have a learning session December 13th, right on the Columbia campus with our partners at the Mentora Institute, Hitendra Wadhwa and his team. And we're going to be talking about the kinds of leadership capabilities and the strategic capabilities that you need to be able to participate well in these kinds of environments. So if you are interested in getting an invitation, it's an invitation only event. We're kind of limiting the numbers. Reach out to me and let me know. So my email is pretty easy to find. Just search for me on the web, or you can reach me at rita@ritamcgrath.com. The other thing we're exploring is we think there may be an appetite for creating a community of I won't call them innovation leaders as much as corporate transformation leaders. These are people who are pretty senior. They have a P&L responsibility. They know they need to do things differently in their organization for it to be thriving for the future. They're incredibly frustrated. They're kind of lonely. Yeah. And right now, there doesn't seem to be a community where they could sort of confidentially share problems or solutions or get our input on what's going on. And so we're exploring that. If you're interested in learning more, we'd love to hear what you think that might look like. We're calling that the Impact Program.
Yeah. So drop us a note, because one of the things that's very clear in, my many years of work in the corporate world and Rita's work on the educational side and research side is a lot of people in the innovation space and in the transformation space they're lonely is the word, and it's very sad. We don't want them to be lonely, but it's the innovation mentality, a true innovation mentality, a true transformation mentality is not the norm in most organizations. And if you just step back and look at the world and look at, go look at the Fortune 500 and say, how many of these companies would you say are truly deeply innovative companies? And then just keep going. And by the way, it gets worse when you leave the Fortune 500, because a lot of them are there because they do have pretty strong innovation programs. But, if you're a transformational leader, if you're an innovative leader, a lot of times you feel like you're the only person swimming upstream, B, are looking for tools, and C, are looking for people who can stimulate thought. So that's what we're thinking through with this program we call Impact. If you'd like to learn more about it, drop us a note. We'll keep you in the loop as it develops, and hopefully we come up with something fun to do in the next several months in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. So to learn more, the Valize.com website, so it's VALIZE website, has a wealth of resources. We've got a sample version of our course. We've got the demo version of our software. So you can play around with those things and kind of get a feel for what we're working on. We're trying to make it really accessible. So it's not just like you have to write a huge corporate check to work with us. So we're trying to build that out. Certainly, we'd love to hear from you if you're interested in bringing us into your company. We both, do some advisory work. Ron does more of the one-on-one work with executives because that's really where his unique skills play out. I do kind of more of the fairy dust, give a speech and be entertaining. But it kind of
it's a little more than that.
It kind of works. It kind of works together. So are there any last questions before we move to conclude?
Well, Frank did confess that he used Gen AI for one of his questions.
Way to go, Frank. Way to go.
Thanks for being honest with us, Frank. So again, if you want to stay in touch, Valize.com, find us. We'll make sure you get on the A list.
There you go. Absolutely. And well, thank you for spending the hour. Thank you for spending the hour with us. And we hope to be working with you. If not in 2023, we're thinking 2024 is going to be an amazing year. So thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.